Most people think negotiation is about saying the right words. I used to believe that too. I thought if I prepared enough arguments, explained myself clearly, and proved that I was reasonable, the outcome would go in my favor. And for a while, I believed my failures meant I just wasn't persuasive enough. But over time, and after losing deals I should have won, I realized something uncomfortable. The moments where I lost the most were the moments where I talked the most. I remember one conversation clearly. It wasn't a business deal. It was with someone I trusted, someone close. I wanted a fair outcome. I wanted to be understood. So I explained, then I explained again. I justified. I defended. I filled every silence. By the end of the conversation, I had said everything perfectly, and still I lost. Not because my logic was weak, but because my position was. That experience forced me to confront a truth most people don't want to hear. Negotiation is not about convincing others. It's about controlling yourself. The calmest person in the room is usually the one with the most power, not the smartest, not the loudest, not the one with the best arguments, the one who doesn't need to rush. Once I started noticing this, I saw it everywhere. I watched a friend repeatedly fail salary negotiations, not because he wasn't qualified, but because he entered every conversation already afraid of losing the offer. His urgency leaked through his words, his tone, his posture. The employer didn't need to push. He did it to himself. I watched another person, quiet, almost unimpressive at first glance, walk away from conversations where everyone else would have stayed and begged. And strangely enough, people kept coming back to him with better terms, more respect, more flexibility. He wasn't manipulative. He wasn't aggressive. He was grounded. That's when it clicked for me. Negotiation is not a battle of words. It's a test of emotional control. And most people fail that test long before the deal is even discussed. We negotiate every day, often without realizing it, with our partners, with our family, with our boss, with friends, even with ourselves. Anytime you want something, anytime there is resistance, anytime there is a difference in desire or timing, you are negotiating. And yet, almost no one is taught how to do it calmly. Instead, we're taught to argue harder, explain more, prove our value, justify our position. But the truth is simple and uncomfortable. The more you try to convince, the weaker you appear. This audiobook is not about clever tricks or fast-talking tactics. It's not about winning through pressure or dominance. It's about something far more effective and far more rare. Control. Control of your emotions. Control of your pace. Control of when to speak and when not to. You'll hear stories in this audiobook. Real situations. People who struggled, people who failed, people who learned the hard way, just like I did. You'll hear about moments where silence did more than any argument ever could. Moments where walking away created more leverage than staying ever would. Moments where appearing calm changed the entire direction of a conversation. And you'll notice a pattern. The people who consistently get better outcomes are not desperate. They are not reactive. They are not trying to win every sentence. They understand that negotiation is a long game, and that reputation, composure, and self-control compound over time. My personal belief, and this audiobook is built on it, is this. If you can stay grounded when others feel pressure, you will almost always have the advantage. Not because you're smarter, but because you're harder to move. Throughout these chapters, you won't be asked to memorize scripts. You won't be given lines to repeat. Instead, you'll learn how to shape your presence, how to slow the conversation down, how to avoid revealing urgency, how to let others talk themselves into positions that benefit you without manipulation. Most importantly, you'll learn how to negotiate without losing yourself in the process. Because the goal isn't just to win deals. The goal is to win them without anxiety, without regret, and without pressure. If there's one thing I hope you take from this audiobook, it's this. You don't gain power by forcing outcomes. You gain power by becoming unshakable. So take a breath, slow down, and let's begin with the foundation of every successful negotiation. What happens before you ever speak? Chapter 1. Negotiation starts before you speak. Most people think negotiation begins when the conversation starts. When two sides sit down, when numbers, terms, or expectations are finally spoken out loud. But by that moment, the negotiation is often already decided. Not by what is said, but by who you are before you say anything. I didn't understand this early on. For a long time, I believed preparation meant having better arguments, better reasons, clear explanations. I thought if I could just explain myself well enough, people would naturally agree with me. So before important conversations, I prepared my words carefully. I rehearsed what I would say. I imagined possible objections and how I would respond. And still, I kept losing outcomes I believed I deserved. What confused me was this. I wasn't unreasonable. I wasn't careless. And yet I kept walking away feeling like I had given up more than I should have. The truth revealed itself slowly and uncomfortably. I wasn't losing because of what I said. I was losing because of how I entered the conversation. There was a subtle tension inside me, a quiet urgency, a need for things to work out, and people felt it. You see, negotiation doesn't begin with words. It begins with posture, not physical posture, but emotional posture. I once watched a close friend go through this cycle repeatedly. He was capable, intelligent, and dependable. On paper, he was always a strong candidate. But every time he discussed salary, boundaries, or expectations, the result was the same: disappointment. He would tell me I didn't want to push too hard, or I didn't want them to think I was difficult. What he didn't realize was that he was negotiating from fear. Fear of being rejected, fear of losing the opportunity, fear of silence. So he spoke quickly. He explained too much. He softened his own requests before anyone else had the chance to challenge them. He never said, "I'm afraid." But his behavior said it for him. That's the part people underestimate. You communicate far more through your emotional state than through your words. Your pacing, your comfort with pauses, your ability or inability to sit with uncertainty. Before you speak, the other person is already reading you. They sense whether you need the deal, whether you're flexible by choice or by desperation, whether walking away is an option for you or just a threat you don't really mean. This assessment shapes everything that follows. I experienced this myself during a negotiation that should have been simple. The terms weren't extreme, the discussion wasn't hostile, but internally I was attached to the outcome. I needed it to work, and that need changed everything. I responded too fast. I nodded too much. I tried to show that I was reasonable, easy to work with, agreeable. I thought I was being cooperative. What I was really doing was giving away leverage. By the end, I agreed to conditions I knew weren't ideal, not because I was forced, but because I didn't trust myself to walk away. That was the moment I finally understood something fundamental. The moment you need a specific outcome, you stop negotiating. You start hoping. Negotiation requires stability. Hope requires permission. People who negotiate well are not cold or detached. They simply enter conversations already prepared to accept more than one ending. They don't cling to a single result. This doesn't mean they don't care. It means they've thought through the alternative. They've asked themselves an honest question most people avoid. If this doesn't go my way, what happens next? When you haven't answered that question, your body answers it for you, with tension. And tension is visible. In families, you see this when one person desperately wants approval. In relationships, when one side is afraid to create discomfort. In business, when someone needs the deal more than they're willing to admit. In every case, the person who needs the outcome the least controls the rhythm of the conversation. They don't rush to fill silence. They don't over-explain. They don't push. They allow space. And space creates pressure without force. I once observed someone I respect deeply walk into a discussion with no visible urgency at all. He didn't dominate the room. He didn't try to impress anyone. He listened. He paused. When he spoke, it was brief and final. What surprised me wasn't his words. It was the reaction. The other side adjusted. They softened. They offered concessions without being asked. Later, I asked him how he stayed so composed. He said something that stayed with me. I already knew I'd be fine if it didn't work out. That single sentence explains more about negotiation than most books ever will. Negotiation starts before you speak because the most important work happens internally. It's the quiet work of removing desperation, of building alternatives, of accepting uncertainty. When you walk into a conversation needing clarity, reassurance, or validation, you hand control to the other side. But when you walk in, grounded, open to agreement, but not dependent on it, you shift the entire dynamic. From this point on, everything in this audiobook builds on this foundation. Techniques only work when they're supported by inner stability. Without it, tactics feel forced. With it, even silence becomes influential. Before you learn how to guide a conversation, you must first learn how to steady the part of you that fears not getting what you want. Because negotiation doesn't reward urgency. It rewards composure. And composure is decided long before the first word is ever spoken. Chapter 2. Control yourself before you control the deal. If negotiation starts before you speak, then control starts before the negotiation. Most people believe control means influence over others, over their decisions, their reactions, their choices. But real control works in the opposite direction. It begins with you. I didn't always understand this. For a long time, I thought losing control meant raising your voice or showing anger. But the truth is more subtle and more dangerous. You can lose control while smiling. You can lose control while sounding polite. You can lose control while trying to be agreeable. Control is lost the moment your emotions start deciding your behavior. I once watched a conversation unfold that made this painfully clear. Two people were negotiating terms that mattered deeply to both of them. On the surface, everything looked calm. No one raised their voice. No one interrupted. But beneath that calm exterior, one person was emotionally invested, and the other wasn't. And the outcome reflected that imbalance perfectly. The emotionally invested person spoke first, explained more, reacted faster. The other person waited, and waiting gave them power. This is something people rarely talk about. Emotions don't just influence negotiations, they shape them. When you feel anxious, you rush. When you feel uncertain, you overcompensate. When you fear loss, you compromise too early. None of this requires anger or conflict. It happens quietly. And once it happens, the deal begins to drift out of your control. I learned this lesson through my own mistakes. There was a time when I believed being flexible was a strength. I thought adaptability showed maturity. And in many areas of life, that's true. But in negotiation, flexibility without self-control becomes self-betrayal. I remember agreeing to terms I didn't believe in, not because I was forced, but because I didn't trust myself to sit with discomfort. I wanted resolution, I wanted certainty, I wanted the tension to end. And so I gave ground. What I didn't realize then was that discomfort is not a signal to retreat. It's a signal to slow down. People who negotiate well have a high tolerance for emotional discomfort. They can sit in silence. They can sit in uncertainty. They can sit with the possibility of no. Most people can't. That's why they lose control, not to others, but to their own reactions. I saw this clearly in someone close to me, a person who was intelligent and thoughtful, yet consistently struggled in difficult conversations. Not because they lacked logic, but because they hated tension. The moment a discussion became uncomfortable, they tried to fix it. They softened their position. They reassured the other person. They explained their intentions. Their goal wasn't to win. It was to feel relief. And relief is expensive in negotiation. The more you seek emotional comfort, the more leverage you give away. This is why control begins internally. Before you can guide a conversation, you must be able to regulate your responses inside it. You must notice when your body wants to react and choose not to. This doesn't mean suppressing emotion. It means not letting emotion drive decisions. There's a difference. The strongest negotiators aren't emotionless. They're emotionally aware. They notice when impatience arises, and they pause. They notice when anxiety creeps in, and they slow down. They notice the urge to explain, and they resist it. That pause creates space, and space changes everything. I once observed a situation where silence did more work than any argument could have. One person made an offer. The other didn't respond immediately. They didn't reject it. They didn't counter. They didn't explain. They simply waited. The silence wasn't aggressive. It wasn't theatrical. It was calm. And in that calm, the other person began to talk. They clarified. They justified. They improved their own offer without being asked. Nothing was said. Control wasn't asserted. It was allowed. This is why self-control is the foundation of negotiation. You cannot control the pace of a conversation if you can't control your impulses. You cannot maintain leverage if you react emotionally to pressure. You cannot guide outcomes if uncertainty unsettles you. The first form of control is emotional regulation. Before any negotiation, there's a quiet preparation most people skip. They prepare arguments. They prepare data. They prepare responses. But they don't prepare their nervous system. They don't ask themselves, how will I behave if this doesn't go my way? How will I respond if there's silence? How will I act if I feel rejected? Without those answers, emotion fills the gap, and emotion rarely negotiates well. This is why the calmest person in the room often has the advantage. Not because they're smarter, but because they're harder to move. They don't need immediate validation. They don't chase agreement. They don't fear temporary discomfort. They allow the process to unfold. As you move forward in this audiobook, remember this principle. Every technique you'll hear, every pause, every question, every strategic silence depends on your ability to stay centered. Without self-control, techniques become manipulation. With self-control, they become influence. Negotiation is not about overpowering others. It's about mastering the part of you that wants certainty too soon. Control yourself first. Only then can you begin to control the deal. Chapter 3. The Power of Saying Less. One of the hardest habits to break in negotiation is the urge to explain. We explain because we want to be understood. We explain because silence feels uncomfortable. We explain because we believe clarity will protect us. But in negotiation, explanation often does the opposite. It weakens your position. I learned this lesson slowly, through repetition and regret. There was a time when I believed being clear meant being thorough. If I could just lay everything out logically, the other person would see that my request was fair, reasonable, balanced. So I talked. I explained my thinking. I justified my expectations. I walked people through my intentions step by step. What I didn't realize was that every extra sentence gave away information, not about the deal, but about me, my priority, my fears, my urgency. And once that information is out, it can't be taken back. I noticed a pattern over time. The more I spoke, the less seriously I was taken. Not because my ideas lacked value, but because my words lacked restraint. Silence, I discovered, carries weight. Words dilute it. I saw this clearly through someone I knew well, a quiet, observant person who rarely spoke at length. In meetings, he wasn't dominant. He didn't interrupt. He didn't rush to add his opinion. At first, people overlooked him. But when he finally spoke, the room listened. Not because his words were louder, but because they were rare. He never explained more than necessary. He answered questions directly. He stopped talking the moment his point was made, and something interesting happened. People began to project authority onto him. They assumed he knew more than he said. They assumed his silence meant confidence, not confusion. This wasn't a trick. It was discipline. Most people underestimate how much power is lost through unnecessary speech. In negotiation, talking is not neutral. It shifts leverage. Every explanation is a signal that you care about being accepted. Every justification suggests uncertainty. Every attempt to fill silence reveals discomfort. This is especially visible in personal relationships. Think about arguments with family or close friends. The more one person explains, the more the other digs in. The conversation becomes less about resolution and more about defense. Not because the explanation is wrong, but because it invites resistance. Silence, on the other hand, creates space. Space allows the other person to think, to feel, to reconsider. I once tested this intentionally. In a conversation where I normally would have defended myself, I chose not to. I stated my position calmly, once, and then stopped. No extra context, no clarification, no emotional padding. The silence that followed was uncomfortable. But instead of pushing back, the other person began to speak. They explained their concerns. They softened their tone. They adjusted their position. Nothing I could have said would have achieved the same result. Because when you speak less, the other person speaks more. And when they speak more, they reveal more. This is one of the most overlooked advantages of restraint. Silence invites disclosure. When you stop filling the space, people instinctively try to fill it themselves. They talk to relieve their own discomfort. They justify their stance. They sometimes negotiate against themselves. Not because you pressured them, but because you didn't. This is why powerful negotiators rarely rush to respond. They let offers sit. They let statements breathe. They let silence do its work. And this silence is not passive. It's intentional. It requires self-control. It requires comfort with uncertainty. It requires trust in your position. Most people don't lack intelligence in negotiation. They lack patience. They speak too soon. They say too much. They try to control outcomes with words instead of presence. But presence doesn't need explanation. Presence is felt. When you speak less, your words land heavier. When you pause, your responses feel deliberate. When you don't rush, you signal strength. This doesn't mean you should be evasive or cold. It means you should be precise. Say what needs to be said, and nothing more. Let the other person react. Let them process. Let them reveal themselves. The power of saying less is not about manipulation. It's about respect for yourself and the conversation. You respect your position enough not to over-defend it. You respect the other person enough to let them engage fully. In negotiation, words are a resource. Spend them carefully, because every unnecessary sentence costs you leverage, and every well-timed pause increases it. As you continue listening, remember this. You don't need to control the conversation with words. You need to control it with restraint. Speak less, listen more, and let silence work in your favor. Chapter 4. Don't argue, reframe. Most people believe negotiation is about proving a point. They think if they argue well enough, if their logic is strong enough, if their reasons are clear enough, the other person will eventually give in. This belief causes more failed negotiations than almost anything else. Because the moment you argue, you've already lost something important. You've lost control of the frame. An argument is not a discussion. It's a collision, and collisions rarely produce cooperation. I learned this lesson in situations that had nothing to do with business. I saw it in family conversations, where everyone wanted to be understood, but no one wanted to listen. The harder one person argued, the more the other resisted. Not because they disagreed completely, but because they felt pushed. The conversation stopped being about the issue. It became about ego. That same pattern shows up everywhere. At work, in partnerships, in negotiations that should have been simple. The moment you argue, the other person stops considering your position and starts defending theirs. And once someone is defending, they are no longer open. This is why arguing feels active, but produces nothing. I once watched a negotiation collapse because of this exact mistake. One side had solid logic, fair terms, reasonable expectations, but they kept pushing their point, correcting the other person, challenging assumptions. They were right, and they still lost, because being right is not the same as being effective. The moment you argue, you accept the other person's frame. You're playing their game on their terms. Reframing works differently. Reframing doesn't fight the other person's position. It changes the angle from which the situation is viewed. Instead of saying, "You're wrong," you quietly ask, "What matters most to you here?" Instead of saying, "That doesn't make sense," you ask, "What risk are you trying to avoid?" These questions do something powerful. They move the conversation away from opposition and toward underlying motivation. I've seen this work in situations where logic alone failed. I remember a friend who was constantly in conflict with his manager. Every discussion turned into a debate. He came prepared with facts, numbers, and explanations, and every time the tension escalated. Nothing changed. One day, instead of arguing, he tried something different. When the conversation started going in the usual direction, he stopped defending himself. He asked a simple question: "What would make this situation feel like a win for you?" The room changed. The manager paused, thought, and answered honestly. What followed wasn't agreement, but progress, because the frame had shifted. Reframing doesn't mean you give up your position. It means you stop attacking theirs. Most arguments fail because they target conclusions instead of causes. People don't hold positions randomly. They hold them because of fears, incentives, or pressures you may not see. When you argue the conclusion, you harden resistance. When you address the cause, you open movement. This is why skilled negotiators rarely say, "I disagree." They say things like, "Help me understand what's driving that. What's the biggest concern if we go another direction? What would need to change for this to work?" These questions aren't weakness, they're leverage. They invite the other person to step out of defense mode and into explanation mode. And when people explain, they often soften. Not because you defeated them, but because you made them feel heard. I once experienced this personally in a situation where I felt completely stuck. The other side was firm, unmoving. Every attempt to persuade them failed. So I stopped trying. Instead of arguing, I reframed the conversation around their priorities. I asked about timelines, about risks, about what success looked like from their side. I didn't change my position. I changed the lens. Slowly, the rigidity disappeared. Not because I pressured them, but because I removed the threat. Reframing works because it preserves dignity. Arguments threaten identity. Reframes protect it. When people feel attacked, they protect themselves. When they feel understood, they reconsider. This is especially important in negotiations involving long-term relationships. You can win an argument and lose trust. You can win a point and lose influence. Reframing avoids that trap. It allows movement without humiliation, agreement without defeat. This doesn't mean you avoid disagreement. It means you express it indirectly. Through questions, through curiosity, through perspective. Instead of saying, "That won't work," you say, "What happens if it doesn't?" Instead of saying, "You're being unreasonable," you say, "What constraint are you working under right now?" These small shifts change the entire tone of a conversation. The goal of negotiation is not to corner the other person. It's to guide them, and guidance requires space. Arguing tightens the space. Reframing expands it. As you move forward, remember this. If a conversation starts feeling tense, if positions harden, if voices rise, even subtly, that's your signal. Stop arguing. Change the frame. Because the person who controls the frame controls the outcome, and the most powerful reframes are delivered calmly, quietly, without needing to be right out loud. Chapter 5. Never reveal your urgency. Urgency is the quiet killer of leverage. Most people don't realize when they reveal it, because urgency doesn't always sound desperate. Sometimes it sounds polite. Sometimes it sounds flexible. Sometimes it sounds easy to work with. But in negotiation, urgency is information, and it's the most expensive information you can give away. I learned this lesson by watching someone very close to me make a mistake they didn't even know they were making. A friend of mine had been searching for a new place to live. He found one he truly liked. Good location, fair price, everything felt right. From the outside, he tried to appear calm. He didn't rush. He didn't pressure. But inside, he was already attached. He imagined himself living there. He pictured the outcome. He wanted it to work. And that desire leaked through. Not in words, but in timing. He replied too quickly. He followed up too soon. He made himself available without being asked. The other side didn't need to ask for concessions. They felt his urgency. The price went up. The terms tightened, and my friend accepted. Because walking away felt worse than paying more. Nothing unfair happened. The negotiation simply responded to urgency. This is the part people misunderstand. Urgency doesn't make you efficient. It makes you predictable. When someone senses you need a deal to happen quickly, they instinctively slow down. They test, they wait, they see how far they can push. Not because they're cruel, but because leverage invites exploration. I've seen the same pattern in job negotiations. People who desperately want the role rush to accept the first offer. They soften their questions. They avoid silence. They signal gratitude too early. Meanwhile, the person who appears comfortable with uncertainty, who doesn't chase reassurance, often receives better terms without ever asking. Urgency is felt long before it's spoken. It shows up in how fast you answer messages, in how often you follow up, in how much you reassure the other side. And every one of those signals shifts power away from you. I once made this mistake myself. I needed an agreement to move forward with a plan I was invested in. Everything depended on that one conversation. And because of that, I entered the discussion already tense. I tried to hide it, but tension doesn't hide well. I agreed too quickly. I nodded too easily. I made concessions before they were requested. When the conversation ended, I knew immediately. I had traded leverage for relief. And relief never lasts. Here's the truth most people don't want to face. The person who can wait controls the conversation. Time is leverage. The more willing you are to slow things down, the stronger your position becomes. The more you rush to resolution, the weaker it gets. This is why skilled negotiators rarely reveal timelines unless it benefits them. They don't announce deadlines. They don't broadcast pressure. Even when pressure exists, they manage how it appears. This doesn't mean lying. It means not volunteering weakness. I once watched a colleague do this brilliantly. He was under real-time pressure. He needed a decision, but he never let that pressure shape his behavior. He responded calmly. He didn't chase answers. he let silence stretch. And because of that, the other side assumed he had options. They moved faster. Urgency is not just about speed. It's about emotional attachment. The moment you imagine a single outcome as the only acceptable one, urgency begins. And urgency shrinks your choices. The solution isn't to stop caring. It's to build alternatives. Before any negotiation, there's a simple but powerful discipline. Never walk in with only one path forward. Even if your alternatives are imperfect, having them changes your energy. It gives you patience. It gives you space. And space protects leverage. This applies everywhere. In relationships, the person afraid of losing the other accepts less respect. In work, the person afraid of missing the opportunity accepts worse terms. In life, the person afraid of delay settles early. Urgency turns negotiation into survival, and survival thinking never negotiates well. The strongest negotiators don't eliminate urgency. They contain it. They acknowledge it privately and refuse to let it dictate their behavior publicly. They slow their responses. They shorten their words. They allow gaps, because gaps create pressure without force. As you move forward, remember this principle. You never need to tell someone you're in a hurry. They'll feel it if you are. And once they feel it, they'll use it, consciously or not. So protect your leverage. Guard your timelines. Manage your attachment. Build options. Because the moment you reveal urgency, you stop negotiating. And the moment you can wait, you start winning. Chapter 6. Let them feel like they're winning. One of the hardest truths about negotiation is that winning doesn't always look like winning. In fact, the most effective negotiations often end with the other person believing they came out ahead. This idea feels uncomfortable to many people. They hear it and think it means weakness. They think it means giving up ground. They think it means being taken advantage of. But that reaction comes from misunderstanding how human ego works. People don't resist deals because the terms are bad. They resist deals because losing feels bad. Ego cares less about outcomes and more about identity. I learned this lesson not in a boardroom, but through personal relationships. I used to approach difficult conversations with a quiet need to be right. Not loud, not aggressive, but present. I wanted the other person to see that my position made sense, that I had thought things through, that I deserved agreement. And even when I got what I wanted on paper, something was off. The relationship felt strained. The tension lingered. The win didn't last. It took time for me to realize why. I had won the terms, but I had injured the ego. When someone feels they lost, they don't forget it. They don't move on cleanly. They look for ways to rebalance power later. This is why deals that look perfect often collapse over time. They were negotiated without psychological safety. I saw this clearly through someone close to me who was exceptionally good at negotiations, better than anyone I knew. What surprised me wasn't how hard he pushed. It was how often he appeared to give in. He would agree to small requests easily. He would acknowledge the other person's points. He would let them believe their input shaped the outcome. At first, I thought he was conceding too much, but when I looked closer, I saw the pattern. He never gave up what mattered most. He let the other person win the surface battle so he could win the strategic one. This is the art most people miss. There are two kinds of wins in negotiation. Tactical wins, small, visible, immediate. Strategic wins, structural, lasting, decisive. Ego is satisfied by the first. Outcomes are determined by the second. When you let someone feel like they're winning tactically, they relax. Their guard drops. Their need to prove themselves disappears, and in that relaxed state, they become flexible. I once applied this intentionally in a situation where I knew pushing harder would backfire. The other person needed to feel respected, needed to feel competent, needed to feel in control. So instead of challenging their position, I reinforced it. I acknowledged their concerns. I credited their judgment. I framed my proposal as an extension of their idea. Nothing about my core objective changed, but the emotional tone did. By the end, they agreed to everything that truly mattered to me, while genuinely believing the outcome reflected their leadership. That's not manipulation. That's understanding human psychology. People don't need to dominate to feel powerful. They need to feel recognized. This is especially true in negotiations with friends, family, or long-term partners. If someone feels humiliated, overridden, or cornered, even politely, the cost will appear later. Resentment is delayed leverage. The smartest negotiators think beyond the moment. They think in terms of relationship momentum. They ask themselves, how will this person feel walking away from this conversation? If the answer is defeated, you've created future resistance. Letting someone feel like they're winning does not mean surrendering your boundaries. It means choosing which battles deserve resistance and which serve a larger purpose. Not every concession is equal. Some concessions cost you nothing. Others cost you everything. The key is to distinguish between what is important and what is merely visible. Ego feeds on visibility. So give ego something visible and protect what's important quietly. This applies in everyday life more than people realize. In relationships, insisting on being right can destroy intimacy. In work, insisting on credit can destroy collaboration. In negotiation, insisting on dominance can destroy outcomes. I've seen people lose excellent deals simply because they couldn't allow the other side to save face. They corrected too publicly. They pushed too hard. They demanded acknowledgement, and the other side walked away. Not because the deal was bad, but because the loss felt personal. Strong negotiators don't need to win every moment. They're patient enough to win the end. They understand that ego is not the enemy. It's a force to be managed. When you align with ego instead of fighting it, resistance fades. One of the simplest ways to do this is through framing. Instead of saying, "I need this," you say, "This seems aligned with what you were saying earlier." Instead of saying, "This is my solution," you say, "This builds on your approach." These small shifts change ownership. When people feel ownership, they defend the deal for you. Another powerful tactic is intentional concession. You give something small, early, and visibly, so you can anchor strength later. This creates a sense of fairness, and fairness creates trust. But there's an important rule here. Never give something away without letting it be felt. A concession that isn't noticed doesn't satisfy ego. And ego unsatisfied keeps pushing. This is why effective negotiators pause before conceding. They signal that something is being given, not thrown away. They slow the moment. They mark the shift, not dramatically, but deliberately. Because perception matters. Letting someone feel like they're winning is not about deception. It's about direction. You guide the emotional narrative while protecting the structural outcome. This requires maturity. Immature negotiators need visible victory. Mature negotiators need sustainable advantage. As you continue listening, remember this. If you corner someone, they'll look for escape. If you embarrass someone, they'll look for revenge. If you let someone feel respected, they'll look for alignment. The goal is not to defeat the other person. The goal is to move them, without making them feel pushed. Sometimes the strongest move is allowing the other side to believe the win was theirs. Because when ego is satisfied, resistance disappears. And when resistance disappears, the deal becomes inevitable. Chapter 7. Walk away without fear. There is a moment in every negotiation where real power quietly appears. It's not when you make a strong argument. It's not when you hold your ground. It's not even when you get a concession. It's the moment you realize you can walk away and mean it. Most people say they're willing to walk away. Very few actually are. and the difference is felt immediately. I used to believe walking away was an aggressive move, a threat, something you used only when negotiations turned hostile. I was wrong. Walking away is not an action, it's a state of mind. And when you truly have it, you don't need to announce it. I learned this by watching someone close to me make a decision that looked irrational on the surface. He had invested time, he had invested energy, he had invested hope. The deal wasn't terrible, it just wasn't right. Everyone around him advised him to stay, to negotiate a bit more, to adjust expectations, to be practical. Instead, he calmly ended the conversation. No anger, no drama, no threat. He simply said, "This doesn't feel aligned for me." And he walked away. At the time, I thought he had lost. A few days later, the other side came back with better terms. Not because he pressured them, but because he removed himself. That moment taught me something fundamental. The ability to walk away is the strongest signal you can send. Not verbally, energetically. It tells the other side you are not trapped, that your identity is not tied to this outcome, that you are choosing, not clinging. Most negotiations fail because people stay too long. They stay because they fear loss. They stay because they fear starting over. They stay because they've already invested too much. This is known as sunk cost thinking, and it destroys leverage. The more you invest emotionally, the harder it becomes to leave, and the harder it becomes to leave, the less power you have. I've seen this play out in relationships, business deals, partnerships, even friendships. People tolerate misalignment because walking away feels like failure. But walking away is not failure. Staying in the wrong situation is. The strongest negotiators understand this deeply. They don't threaten to leave. They don't dramatize it. They simply know where their line is, and because they know it, they negotiate differently. They're calmer, they're slower, they're less reactive. Not because they don't care, but because they refuse to abandon themselves for agreement. Fear is what keeps people stuck at the table. Fear of missing out, fear of regret, fear of uncertainty. But fear is visible. It shows up in compromise too early, in tolerating disrespect, in accepting terms you know you'll resent later. Walking away without fear doesn't mean you enjoy loss. It means you trust yourself to recover. That trust changes everything. I once faced a negotiation where the other side kept pushing, subtly, politely, but consistently. Each round, they asked for a little more. Each time, they assumed I would adapt. I felt the pressure, and for a moment, I considered staying, just to keep momentum. Instead, I paused, and I realized something simple but uncomfortable. If I stayed, I would win the deal and lose my respect for myself. So I ended it. Not emotionally, not impulsively, cleanly. The silence that followed was heavy, but it was also clarifying. They didn't chase me immediately, and that was fine. Weeks later, an opportunity far better appeared, one that aligned without force. Walking away didn't close doors, it cleared space. This is the part most people never experience, because they never allow it. When you walk away from what's wrong, you make room for what's right. Negotiation is not about forcing outcomes, it's about selecting them. And selection requires the courage to say no. The irony is this: the more willing you are to walk away, the less often you have to. Because people sense it. They sense when you're choosing, not begging. They sense when your presence is voluntary. They sense when your yes is meaningful. And that awareness reshapes the negotiation. This doesn't mean you abandon discussions at the first sign of resistance. It means you know your non-negotiables. It means you respect your limits. It means you don't trade long-term alignment for short-term relief. Walking away without fear is not about dominance. It's about integrity. It's about being willing to disappoint others rather than betray yourself. And that kind of integrity is rare. As you continue listening, remember this: Every negotiation tests not just your strategy, but your self-respect. If staying costs you peace, the price is too high. If agreement requires shrinking yourself, the deal is already broken. The strongest position you can ever hold is knowing you'll be okay, even if this doesn't work out. Because when you truly believe that, you don't negotiate from fear. You negotiate from choice. And choice is the highest form of power. There is another layer to walking away that most people never reach. It's not just about leaving the table, it's about what happens inside you when you do. For many people, the fear isn't actually losing the deal. It's losing the story they told themselves about what that deal would mean. They imagine the relief, the validation, the sense of progress. So when they consider walking away, it feels like stepping backward, even when it's clearly the right move. This is why walking away feels heavy. You're not just letting go of an outcome, you're letting go of an imagined future. I felt this conflict many times. Moments where logic told me to leave, but emotion whispered, just try a little longer. That whisper is seductive. It sounds reasonable. It sounds mature. It sounds patient. But often, it's just fear wearing a calm voice. Fear of starting over. Fear of uncertainty. Fear of admitting something didn't work. Strong negotiators learn to recognize this moment. They pause, not to convince themselves to stay, but to check whether staying is aligned or just comfortable. Walking away without fear doesn't mean you feel nothing. It means you don't let emotion override clarity. This clarity changes how others experience you. When someone realizes you are willing to leave, not emotionally, not dramatically, but cleanly, it shifts their perception instantly. They stop assuming you'll adapt endlessly. They stop testing how much you'll tolerate. They reassess the value of keeping you engaged. Even if they never call you back, something important happens. You reclaim authority over yourself. And that authority compounds. Each time you walk away from misalignment, you strengthen your ability to do it again. You trust yourself more. You negotiate from a steadier place next time. This is why people who can walk away without fear rarely end up alone or stuck. They may lose deals, but they gain direction, and direction is far more valuable than forced progress. Remember this: if you can't leave, you're not negotiating, you're enduring, and endurance is not power. Chapter 8. Negotiation is a long game. Most people approach negotiation as a moment, a single conversation, a single decision, a single win or loss. They focus on what happens now. This deal, this agreement, this outcome. But the most effective negotiators are playing a different game. They're not thinking in moments. They're thinking in trajectories. Because negotiation is never isolated. Every conversation leaves a residue. How you negotiate today shapes how people approach you tomorrow. I didn't fully understand this early on. I treated negotiations as transactions, things to complete, close, and move past. I focused on getting the best possible terms in the moment, believing that was the definition of success. And sometimes, it worked. I got what I wanted. I secured favorable outcomes. I walked away technically satisfied. But over time, I noticed something subtle. People became guarded. Conversations became tense faster. Opportunities stopped flowing naturally. I hadn't burned bridges, but I had made them colder. That's when I began to see what I had missed. Every negotiation is also a message. It tells people who you are under pressure, how you treat power, how you handle disagreement, how you behave when you don't need to be nice. Those impressions compound. I watched someone I respected build extraordinary leverage over years, not by winning hard, but by being consistent. He wasn't always the toughest negotiator in the room, but he was the most predictable in the best way. Predictable in his calm, predictable in his boundaries, predictable in his fairness. People knew where he stood. They trusted his no. They valued his yes. And because of that, negotiations with him became easier over time. He didn't need to push. His reputation did the work for him. This is what most people underestimate. Short-term wins can cost long-term leverage. If someone feels squeezed, embarrassed, or cornered, even politely, they remember it. Maybe not immediately, maybe not consciously, but they adjust. They protect themselves next time. They limit flexibility. They negotiate defensively. On the other hand, when someone feels respected, even in disagreement, they open up later. They offer information. They create options. They invite collaboration. Negotiation is not just about outcomes. It's about memory. And memory shapes future power. This is especially true in environments where you don't negotiate once, but repeatedly. Workplaces, industries, families, communities. In these settings, aggressive wins age poorly. Calm consistency ages well. I've seen people dominate a negotiation and lose influence, and I've seen people accept less today and gain more over time. The difference was perspective. The long game asks different questions. Will I want to negotiate with this person again? Will they want to negotiate with me? Will trust increase or decrease after this conversation? These questions don't weaken your position. They strengthen it because they force you to think beyond ego. The strongest negotiators are not obsessed with control. They're committed to stability. They don't spike emotional highs and lows. They don't swing between charm and pressure. They stay grounded, regardless of outcome. That groundedness becomes their signature. People learn that negotiating with them feels clear, predictable, safe. And safety creates opportunity. This doesn't mean you avoid hard conversations. It means you handle them cleanly. You say no without cruelty. You say yes without overpromising. You disagree without humiliation. Over time, this creates an invisible advantage. People come to you first. They speak honestly. They negotiate in good faith because they expect the same. This is what it means to play the long game. It's understanding that every negotiation trains the other person how to treat you in the future. If you teach them that you'll bend under pressure, they'll apply it again. If you teach them that you'll stay calm and firm, they'll adjust. Not because you demanded respect, but because you modeled it. I've come to believe this deeply. The goal of negotiation is not to win the deal. It's to build a position you don't have to fight for next time. That position is built slowly, through consistency, through restraint, through self-control. This is why all the principles you've heard so far matter. Why controlling yourself comes before controlling the deal. Why silence works. Why urgency destroys leverage. Why letting others feel like they're winning protects outcomes. Why walking away preserves integrity. These are not tricks. They are signals. Signals that you are stable. Signals that you are not reactive. Signals that you are playing something bigger than the moment. Negotiation rewards those who think beyond immediacy. Those who understand that power grows quietly. That reputation compounds. That calm becomes currency. As you close this chapter, remember this. You don't need to win every negotiation. You need to win the pattern of how people experience you, the pattern of how you experience yourself. If you leave conversations feeling anxious, resentful, or compromised, something is off, even if the terms look good. But if you leave conversations calm, aligned, and respected, even when you don't get everything you want, you're building something far more valuable. You're building leverage that lasts. Negotiation is not a sprint. It's not even a marathon. It's a long, quiet walk, where those who stay composed end up far ahead. There is one final truth about negotiation that only becomes clear with time. You don't remember most deals, but you remember how you felt during them, and so does everyone else. Years later, People rarely recall exact numbers or terms. They remember whether they felt pressured, whether they felt respected, whether they felt safe or cornered. Those feelings shape future behavior far more than logic ever could. I've noticed this in my own life. There are people I negotiate with easily, almost effortlessly. Conversations flow, resistance is low, trust is high. And then there are others where everything feels heavy, even before anything is discussed. The difference isn't intelligence or competence, it's history. Negotiation leaves emotional fingerprints. If past interactions were calm and fair, people enter open. If past interactions were tense or extractive, people enter guarded. This is why the long game matters so much. You're not just negotiating outcomes. You are negotiating your future positioning. Every time you stay calm under pressure, you teach people that emotional escalation won't move you. Every time you respect boundaries, yours and theirs, you teach people where the line is. Over time, this reduces friction. People stop testing you. They stop pushing randomly. They become clearer and more direct. That clarity is a form of leverage most people never achieve, because they chase short-term wins instead. They push for advantage now, then wonder why every future negotiation feels harder. The long game rewards those who are consistent, not clever. Those who don't surprise people with sudden aggression. Those who don't collapse under pressure. Those who negotiate the same way whether they're winning or losing. That consistency builds reputation. And reputation negotiates for you before you even show up. When people already know you won't rush, won't beg, won't explode, and won't betray yourself, half the negotiation is already done. This is why true negotiation mastery feels quiet. There's no drama, no theatrics, no constant renegotiation of respect, just steady alignment. As you carry these principles forward, remember, you're not trying to become unbeatable. You're becoming unmovable. And unmovable people don't need to fight for leverage. They attract it. If there's one thing I hope stayed with you through this audiobook, it's not a technique, not a tactic, not a clever line to memorize. It's a way of standing in the world. Negotiation, at its core, is not about getting more. It's about becoming steadier. Before I understood this, I treated negotiation like a skill you turn on only when needed. Something you use in important moments, salary talks, deals, conflicts. But life doesn't separate itself that cleanly. We negotiate every day, with our time, with our boundaries, with our energy, with the people closest to us. And the way we negotiate externally is always a reflection of how we negotiate internally. I've learned this through mistakes, through conversations where I spoke too fast because silence made me uncomfortable, through agreements I accepted too early just to feel relief, through moments where I stayed longer than I should have, because walking away felt like losing. None of those moments failed because I lacked intelligence. They failed because I lacked calm. What this audiobook has tried to show you, quietly, without drama, is that calm is not passive. Calm is power. When you don't rush, people adjust. When you don't over-explain, people listen. When you don't need immediate certainty, you gain leverage. This is not manipulation. It's maturity. Negotiation doesn't reward those who want it the most. It rewards those who can remain whole without it. One of the hardest lessons I've had to accept is this. You can't negotiate well if you're afraid of losing, afraid of being rejected, afraid of disappointing others, afraid of starting over. Fear makes you flexible in the wrong moments. It makes you quiet when you should speak and talk when you should pause. Learning to negotiate is really learning to sit with discomfort. The discomfort of silence, the discomfort of not being chosen, the discomfort of uncertainty. Most people spend their lives trying to eliminate these feelings. Strong negotiators learn to carry them. And once you can carry them, you stop giving your power away unconsciously. Something shifts when you no longer negotiate for validation. When you don't need the other person to agree with you to feel secure. When you don't need the deal to work out to trust yourself. You become harder to move, but easier to work with. That balance is rare, and it's what creates respect. I want to be clear about something. This audiobook is not telling you to be cold, or distant, or emotionally detached. It's inviting you to be grounded. Grounded people can listen without reacting. They can disagree without attacking. They can walk away without resentment. They don't need to dominate conversations because they're not dominated by them. As you leave this audiobook, you don't need to apply everything at once. In fact, you shouldn't. Start small. The next time you feel the urge to explain, pause. The next time silence feels uncomfortable, let it be. The next time you feel pressure to decide quickly, slow down. Notice what happens, not externally, but internally. Notice how your body responds when you don't rush to fix discomfort. Notice how conversations change when you stop chasing agreement. Notice how people adjust when they sense you're not trying to control them. Negotiation is not about controlling others. It's about not being controlled by your own reactions. That's the quiet discipline behind every principle you've heard. And over time, that discipline compounds. You begin to trust yourself more. You leave conversations without regret. You stop replaying what you should have said. You become consistent, and consistency builds reputation, even when no one is talking about it. People remember how it feels to negotiate with you. They remember whether they felt rushed or respected, whether they felt pressured or understood, whether they felt safe or cornered. Those memories shape future opportunities. This is why the long game matters. You're not just negotiating outcomes. You're negotiating how people experience you and how you experience yourself. If you finish a conversation feeling calm, even when you didn't get everything you wanted, you're doing something right. If you leave with your integrity intact, even when you had to say no, you're building real leverage. Because the strongest position you can ever hold is knowing you won't abandon yourself to keep the peace. You don't need to win every deal. You don't need to prove your intelligence. You don't need to be the loudest voice in the room. You need to be steady. Steady when others rush. Steady when others push. Steady when outcomes are uncertain. That steadiness becomes your signature. And once it does, negotiation stops feeling like a battle. It becomes a conversation, one you no longer fear. Thank you for taking the time to listen. Carry these ideas quietly. Apply them patiently. And remember, you don't win negotiations by forcing outcomes. You win them by becoming unshakable.